going to show you how to identify what the main topic of a piece of nonfiction is. So when we talk about the main topic is what either the entire book, an entire article, an entire chapter, or a section or a paragraph is about. Usually if you're talking about a book or an article, it's a big idea like elephants or manatees or volcanoes. Whereas as you get into chapters and sections and paragraphs, it becomes a little bit more specific. So let's practice. For each of these, we're going to identify the type of text and then also what would the topic of that text be. So our first example here is a book. We know this would be a book because we're seeing the cover. We also would know that it has hard or paperback surfaces on each side. It has lots of pages. So when we see something like that, that would be the book. Usually the title will give us the topic of that book. So in this case, this is a book that's going to be about manatees. That would be the main topic of the text. As we look at this next example, this would be an example of a chapter within the book. Notice the chapters are always going to be something that we find in a book. Usually a chapter is multiple pages. If we look at the title of this chapter, it's called Super Swimmers. And I'm going to start reading the chapter to help us figure out what the topic is. So follow along with your eyes as we read this chapter. It says, Super Swimmers. Manatees can move their large bodies gracefully through the water. They swim upside down and roll. They even do somersaults. Manatees don't like water that is too deep. They like to stay in shallow water in oceans and rivers. There, they find food and warm water. A manatee's body is built for living in the water. And if I look at the diagram, it talks about the parts of their body. The tail is a large, flat, and round at the end. It moves up and down to power the manatee through the water. The eyes are small, but manatees can see well, even in cloudy water. The nostrils. Manatees breathe air through these holes, but they close tightly underwater. The lips. They are big and strong. They wrap around plants and pull them into the manatee's mouth. And the flippers, they help steer the manatee. They also bring water to its mouth. When I think about this whole chapter, not just the diagram, but the whole chapter really talked about the main topic of this is how manatees are able to swim. So really this talks about, again, the topic being how manatees are able to swim. Let's look at another example. This is just one page. Well, we wouldn't say in this page. In this case, this would be a section. A section is usually multiple paragraphs. So in this section, it says manatees have no front teeth. They don't need them because they don't eat meat. Manatees have only large back teeth called molars. The molars help grind their food. So if I'm talking about the topic of this section, the topic of this section would be manatee's teeth. It's only talking about the teeth of the manatee. Now we have just a paragraph. A paragraph is a short amount of text. Usually it's separated from other paragraphs, either with that indentation or that little space to start off the paragraph, or it is sectioned off by a gap or a space between each paragraph. So follow along as I read this paragraph. It says the calf must stay with its mother for the first 2 years. The mother teaches her calf how to live on its own. So if I'm thinking about the topic of this paragraph, it's really talking about or describing how a mother and a calf stay together. Now, this is an example of a scholastic news. This would be an example of an article. Usually when we talk about an article, An article is something that is inside a magazine, or we might call it a passage. Either of these would be considered a correct type of text. So Scholastic News is not a book because it doesn't have a cover that's like that hard or that paperback cover. So it's important to realize that these would be considered articles. Again, it's made up of sections and it's made up of paragraphs. A section would start with the heading. So if we look, we have headings like a dangerous problem right here. We have a safe solution and a world of wildlife corridors. Those would all be headings for the section. Usually the heading will give us a little hint what that section's about. You can also see the paragraphs because they have those indentations. So if we look here, we have an indentation. This would be one paragraph. This would be another paragraph. But again, this whole thing here would be a section. It's made up of 3 different paragraphs. So depending on whether we're looking at the whole article, we're looking at a section, or we're looking at a paragraph, that would help us figure out the main ideas. Now go in and start the activity on Seesaw.